the fact that it can only live in one mode and one presentation was excruciating for me.
Because we can all get caught up in a monotony and a linear.
Completely annoy the people around you by not knowing the words. It's perfect. This is your night.
When you see Keith Urban on stage today, guitar in hand, and that famous...
I'm allergic to it. Yeah. That's the only difference. If I wasn't allergic to it, I'd be drinking.
Fair enough.
But, you know, I break out in cuffs.
Smile lighting up his face, you might think you're looking at a man who has everything.
Always smelled good. Always looked good. He's just a badass. He's cool as hell. But he was an addict.
The Grammy Awards, the beautiful wife, Nicole Kidman, the mansion in...
You know, I'm sure a child psychologist would probably say it was I wished he'd stared at me like that.
Nashville, the millions of fans around the world. But what if I told you that behind all that success lies a story so heartbreaking, so full of pain and struggle, that it might change everything you thought you knew about this country music superstar? Keith Urban's life has been anything but easy. From a childhood marked by tragedy and fear to battles with addiction that nearly destroyed him, his journey to stardom is paved with more tears than you could ever imagine. Today, at 57 years old, Keith carries scars that most people will never see. This is the real story of Keith Urban, and I promise you, it's nothing like what you've heard before. If you've ever been moved by Keith's music or inspired by his story, please hit that like button. Your support means everything to artists who have given their hearts and souls to their craft. Now, let's dive into a story that will leave you with a whole new understanding of what it means to survive and thrive against impossible odds. Keith Urban wasn't born into luxury or fame. He came into this world on October 26, 1907, in a small town called Whangarei in New Zealand. But his earliest memories weren't filled with birthday parties or playground laughter. Instead, they were filled with constant moving, packing up their lives over and over again, never really having a place to call home. When Keith was just 2 years old, his family packed up everything they owned and moved to Australia. They settled in a place called Caboolture in Queensland, hoping for a fresh start and maybe a little bit of peace. But peace was the last thing little Keith would find in his new home. Imagine being 9 years old and Witeamed, hatching everything you've ever known disappear in flames. That's exactly what happened to Keith Urban. One terrible day, their family home caught fire and burned to the ground. Everything was gone. His toys, his clothes, family photos, everything that made their house a home just vanished in smoke and ash. Keith would later remember standing there with his family, watching their whole world burn down, left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The only thing that kept them going was the kindness of neighbors who showed up with boxes of clothes and food. It was Keith's first real taste of how quickly life can change, and how sometimes strangers can be more caring than the people who are supposed to love you most. But the fire that destroyed their house was nothing compared to the fire of anger and pain that burned inside their home every single day. Keith's father, Robert Urban, was a man who lived two completely different lives. On one hand, he loved country music, and was the person who first put a guitar in Keith's hands. On the other hand, he was an alcoholic whose drinking made him unpredictable and sometimes scary. Keith grew up walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of his father would come home each day. Would it be the dad who loved music and wanted to share that passion with his son? Or would it be the angry man whose drinking made him say hurtful things, and sometimes worse? Keith once said something that breaks your heart when you really think about it. He said, "I don't remember him ever telling me he loved me." Can you imagine that? A little boy, desperate for his father's love and approval, but never hearing those 3 simple words that every child needs to hear. Instead of hugs and encouragement, Keith's childhood was filled with fear and uncertainty. He never knew when his father's mood would change, when the yelling would start, or when things might get physical. But even in the darkest times, there were small moments of light. One day, Keith's father did something that would change everything. He put a sign in the window of his convenience store. The sign said he was looking for a guitar teacher for his son. It was a rare moment of kindness from a man who struggled to show love in normal ways, but it was exactly what Keith needed. That little sign led Keith to Sue McCarthy, a woman who would become much more than just a guitar teacher. She became his first real mentor, someone who saw the pain in this young boy and gave him something beautiful to focus on instead. Keith started playing ukulele when he was just 4 years old. By the time he was 6, he was holding a guitar like it was the most precious thing in the world. And in many ways, it was. Music became Keith's escape from a home that often felt more like a prison. When his father was drinking and the house was filled with tension, Keith could pick up his guitar and disappear into a world where the only thing that mattered was the next note, the next chord, the next song. Music didn't just become Hagst, his hobby. It became his lifeline, his way of surviving in a world that often felt too hard for a little boy to handle. Keith started performing when he was still very young, playing at local music festivals and small venues around Australia. People were amazed by this little boy who could play guitar like someone 3 times his age. He even started winning awards, including something called the Golden Guitar, which was a big deal in Australian country music. To everyone watching, Keith looked like a child prodigy, a natural talent who was destined for greatness. But what they didn't see was the scared little boy behind the music, using his guitar to speak all the words he couldn't say out loud. Every song was a cry for help. Every performance was his way of trying to prove that he was worth loving, even if his own father couldn't tell him so. As Keith got older, he started playing in pubs and bars around Queensland. His parents would drive him from gig to gig, maybe hoping that his music could save their family in some way. Keith would stand on stages that were way too big for his small frame and his broken heart, trying to make sense of the chaos in his life through the only language that made sense to him: music. Keith once said that music whipped me. It gave me somewhere to go when home didn't feel like home. Those words tell you everything you need to know about what his childhood was really like. Home should be the safest place in the world for a child, but for Keith, home was often the place where he felt most afraid and alone. The years that followed weren't easy either. Keith's talent was undeniable, but talent alone isn't enough to make it in the music business. He spent years playing in small venues, trying to get noticed, trying to find his place in a world that seemed to have no room for a kid from Australia with big dreams and an even bigger heart. In 1990, Keith released his first album in Australia, but it barely made a ripple outside of his home country. For most people, that might have been enough. But Keith Urban had learned something important during his painful childhood. He knew how to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. He had survived his father's anger, the fire that destroyed their home, and years of feeling unloved and unwanted. A little thing like rejection from the music industry wasn't going to stop him now. So in '92, Keith made one of the bravest decisions of his life. He packed up everything he owned and moved to Nashville, Tennessee, the heart of American country music. He didn't know anyone there. He didn't have any connections or guarantees. All he had was his guitar, his voice, and a determination that had been forged in the fires of a difficult childhood. Nashville wasn't kind to Keith at first. In fact, it was downright cruel. Doors didn't just close in his face, they slammed shut. He played backup guitar for other artists, wrote songs that other people got to sing, and swallowed his pride more times than he could count. There were nights when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, if maybe he wasn't meant to be a star after all. Keith formed a band called The Ranch in the mid-'90s, and for a while it looked like they might make it big. But the band fell apart, and Keith found himself back where he started, alone, struggling, and wondering if his dreams would ever come true. But Keith had learned something important during those dark years of his childhood. He had learned that sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes you have to keep walking through the darkness, even when you can't see the light ahead, because that's the only way to find out what's waiting for you on the other side. It took 7 long years, but in 1989, Keith finally got his big break. He released his first American solo album, and suddenly, everything changed. His song, But for the Grace of God, shot to #1 on the country charts, and people finally started paying attention to the boy from Australia who had been trying to make it in Nashville for almost a decade. But success brought its own set of problems. Keith found himself dealing with something called imposter syndrome, constantly worrying that he didn't deserve his success, that people would figure out he was just a scared little boy pretending to be a star. The same feelings of not being good enough that had haunted him as a child came flooding back, even as his career was taking off. The early 2000s were a whirlwind for Keith. His song, Somebody Like You, became one of the biggest country hits of the decade. His albums were selling millions of copies. He was winning Grammy Awards and Country Music Association Awards. On the outside, it looked like Keith Urban had finally made it, like all those years of struggle had been worth it. But inside, Keith was falling apart. The success that he had worked so hard for was overwhelming him. He started using alcohol and other substances to cope with the pressure, the loneliness, and the old pain that never seemed to go away. The same demons that had haunted his childhood were now threatening to destroy everything he had built. Keith was living a double life. During the day, he was the charming country star that everyone loved. He was performing on the biggest stages in the world. His albums were topping the charts, and his face was on magazine covers. But at night, when the lights went down and the crowds went home, Keith was still that scared little boy who never felt good enough, who never heard his father say, "I love you," who was still trying to prove that he deserved to be loved. The pressure of maintaining this double life was crushing him. Keith later admitted that there were times when he questioned whether he wanted to keep living at all. The pain from his childhood, combined with the overwhelming pressure of fame, was more than he could handle on his own. But then something amazing happened. In January 2005, Keith met Nicole Kidman at a Hollywood party. Nicole was already a huge movie star, an Academy Award winner who was known all over the world. Keith was intimidated by her success and her beauty, but there was something else there too. There was a connection that neither of them could ignore. Keith was so nervous about calling Nicole that he waited 4 months after they met before he finally picked up the phone. When he did call, something magical happened. They started talking, really talking, in a way that Keith had never been able to talk to anyone before. Nicole saw past the fame and the success. She saw the hurt little boy inside the man, and instead of running away, she moved closer. On June 25, 2006, Keith and Nicole got married in a beautiful ceremony in Sydney, Australia. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale, the country music star and the movie star living happily ever after. But the reality was much more complicated than that. Just 4 months after their wedding, Keith's demons caught up with him again. All the old pain, all the fears, all the hurt from his childhood came flooding back, and Keith relapsed. He started drinking again, started using substances again, and for a while it looked like he might lose everything, including the woman who had just promised to love him forever. But Nicole Kidman is made of stronger stuff than most people realize. Instead of walking away, she did something that probably saved Keith's life. She organized an intervention, bringing together Keith's closest friends and addiction experts to confront him with love and truth. She made it clear that this wasn't about controlling him or changing him. This was about saving his life. In October 2006, Keith entered the Betty Ford Center for Addiction Treatment. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done, admitting that he needed help, that he couldn't handle his problems on his own. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing it just for himself. He was doing it for Nicole, for their marriage, and for the chance to build a life that wasn't haunted by the ghosts of his past. The treatment worked. Keith later said that marrying Nicole and getting sober were the two things that truly allowed him to start living instead of just surviving. In 2008, they welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, and Keith said that becoming a father was the most humbling experience of his life. In 2010, their second daughter, Faith Margaret, was born through a surrogate. Fatherhood changed Keith in ways that nothing else ever had. Suddenly, it wasn't about running away from his pain anymore. It was about being present for his daughters, about giving them the kind of father he had always wished he could have had. Keith was determined to break the cycle of pain that had haunted his own childhood. Today, at 57 years old, Keith Urban is a different man than the scared little boy who once watched his house burn down, or the struggling artist who spent years being rejected in Nashville. He's still making music, still touring, still connecting with fans all over the world. But now his music comes from a place of healing instead of pain, from joy instead of desperation. Keith and Nicole have built a beautiful life together. They split their time between several homes around the world, including a mansion in Nashville, a penthouse in Sydney, and a historic farmhouse in Australia. But their real wealth isn't measured in dollars or real estate. It's measured in the peace they've found together, the love they share with their daughters, and the healing that has taken place in Keith's wounded heart. Keith's estimated net worth is around $75 million, and together with Nicole, they're worth over $250 million. But Keith's lifestyle remains surprisingly simple. He cooks Italian food with his daughters, works out in his home gym, meditates regularly, and finds peace in painting. He's been completely sober for years now, and he says that sobriety has given him a clarity and peace that he never knew was possible. The man who once felt unloved and unwanted now spends his days surrounded by people who adore him. His daughters think he hung the moon. Nicole still looks at him like he's the most amazing man in the world, and fans all over the globe sing along to songs that came from the deepest places of his heart. Keith's story isn't just about overcoming a détonnement, addiction, or childhood trauma, though those are certainly part of it. It's about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. It's about the way music can save a life and give meaning to pain. It's about how sometimes the very things that almost destroy us can become the foundation for something beautiful. When Keith looks back on his life now, he doesn't focus on the Grammy Awards or the #1 hits, though he's grateful for all of that success. Instead, he thinks about quiet moments with his family, about the sound of his daughters laughing, about the way Nicole's hand feels in his after all these years. He thinks about how far he's come from that scared little boy who never heard his father say, "I love you." Keith's music has always been honest, but now it comes from a place of wholeness instead of brokenness. His 24 album, High, reflects the peace and maturity he's found in recent years. Songs like Straight Line show a man who has learned to navigate life's challenges without losing himself in the process. The tragedy of Keith Urban's story isn't that he suffered so much as a child or struggled with addiction as an adult. The tragedy is that it took so many years for him to understand that he was worthy of love all along. The little boy who desperately wanted to hear his father say, "I love you," grew up to become a man who says those words to his own daughters every single day. Keith's story reminds us that no matter how dark our past might be, no matter how broken we might feel, there's always hope for healing. It might take years, it might take the love of good people, it might take professional help, but healing is possible. Keith is living proof that you can rise from the ashes of a painful childhood and build something beautiful with your life. Today, Keith Urban stands as more than just a country music superstar. He's a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of love, and proof that it's never too late to rewrite your story. He's a man who took the worst parts of his life and transformed them into something that brings joy to millions of people around the world. The next time you hear a Keith Urban song on the radio, remember that every note comes from a heart that has known deep pain and found its way to healing. Every lyric is a testament to the power of perseverance. Every performance is a celebration of a life that almost didn't make it, but chose to keep fighting instead. Keith's journey isn't over yet. At 57, he's still making music, still growing as a person, still finding new ways to connect with the people he loves. His story continues to inspire people who are fighting their own battles, showing them that it's possible to overcome even the most difficult circumstances. If Keith Urban's incredible story has touched your heart the way it has touched mine, I want to ask you to do something. Please hit that like button to show your appreciation for his courage and talent. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that there's always hope, no matter how dark things might seem right now. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about the people who have shaped our world through their music, their courage, and their refusal to give up. Keith Urban's story is far from over, and neither is yours. No matter what you're facing today, remember that healing is possible. Love is real, and your story can have a beautiful ending too. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the remarkable life of Keith Urban, a man who turned his deepest pain into his greatest strength.